All right, guys, we are we're going live for round three. I keep setting the video to private, and I needed it on public. So if you're around and you want to tune in, make sure that you tune in and hear what's going on. A big shout out to those of you that tuned in last week for the broadcast. Over 11,000 views as we talked about this whole idea of participation trophies and whether or not participation trophies are bad. Listen, I am not a fan of trophies. I'm not a fan of participation trophies, and I'm not a fan of real trophies in a little kid's life. First of all, they don't care, and as parents and coaches, we don't need to care that much. So, and the other thing that we need to settle on that is that, listen, trophies come in a lot of shapes, sizes, and forms. So, listen, when I put every touchdown run of my kid on Facebook, you just got to be careful. Listen, we do not want that kid to think that, life revolves around him, because that is a hard habit to break. Because as we looked last week, two biggest problems in sport are not participation trophies. The two biggest problems in sport are self, which is a mankind problem, and then the other one is sport itself, is that the systems that we create and utilize are actually the things that we despise later on. So huge thanks to all of you that tuned in, shared. Make sure you share this video. Don't just like it, because we want to get this message out that when it comes to this whole idea of sport, there truly is a better way. That listen, sport is idolized in America today. It's on TV 24/7. We're creating new stations every day to play more things. And I am a sports fanatic. Any sport, I love it. Last night I watched Nebraska and Texas play in the volleyball Final Four, I think it was. Kudos to Texas for the win over an awesome Nebraska team that's always tough. But listen, I'm a fan of sport, but listen, we got to keep sport in perspective, and we got to use it to accomplish the right things, because less than 4% of kids are going to play at the collegiate level. Less than that are going to play professionally. So let's make sure of the millions of kids that are involved in sport, let's give them something that can actually help them in life. Shout out to Quantel Langford there, Chattanooga Wrestling alumni. We are coming to you live today from Athens, Ohio. The Mocs are competing against the University of Ohio, or Ohio University tonight here in Athens, Ohio. So big match for us tonight at 7. Tune in and watch that as well. So the question today is this, and I hear this a lot. I have 4 kids of my own. I'm not a huge fan of youth sports because I think they're financially draining. They're emotionally draining. They can be spiritually draining because we miss what matters most just to be a part of a 6-year-old Little League game. So listen, I am a sports fan, but I think you have to have some perspective. But I hear this all the time, even in my own children's lives. Here's what I hear people say. If you don't start early nowadays, you will always be behind. If you don't start early, you're always going to be behind. Well, I've done some races in my day and some endurance events. One of my great teachers, Steve Underwood, really got me into those things. And here's what I've learned about races, is that you can start behind and you can still finish first. So as parents, coaches, whoever, listen, it doesn't matter if I'm a middle school coach and I have 3 years with someone, or high school coach with 4 years, or a college coach with 5 years, or I'm a parent that has 18 to 20 years with my kid. We need to stop asking the question of when they should start. And we need to start truly engaging and thinking through the question of where do we want our young people to finish? Because starting early is only a necessity if 8-year-old sports are listen, if you want to be an 8-year-old superstar, then here's what you got to do. You got to start early at 4 or 5. You got to get the training. And listen, I promise you there's a good chance you could have an 8-year-old superstar. That doesn't mean that you're going to have a high school superstar. You're going to have a collegiate athlete. Because what happens is at 8 years old is always, it's not always indicative of what's going to happen later. So instead of us constantly asking the question of when we should start, we should really be asking the question of where we want them to finish. So let's take this whole idea of youth sport. There's a lot of stuff out there that talks about like the 10,000 hour rule. It's all about reps. We see sports in other countries kind of thriving because the kids actually play more. We're a family that we've really said, hey, we're going to choose to play, not pay, because I believe this, that sport and anytime you want to get better at something, it can be woodworking, it can be speaking, it can be baseball, whatever. If you want to get better at something, it's got to be about reps. And here's what I've learned. And listen, our kids have participated in this. I'm not anti this. I just think we have to have some perspective. If you're a baseball player, you can play a game, 2 games, 3 games, and here's what's crazy. You could never touch a baseball. The greatest thing you accomplished in that game is the warm-up or in between innings where you're throwing and catching, because you could walk, you could strike out, you could never have a ball hit to your position. And then here's what we say in America today. That's how you get better. You got to have these guys competing, playing games. Listen, we have to move from playing so many games to getting back to practicing and preparing. And I think there's no greater playground for that than the backyard. I know Coach Huggins, the famous collegiate basketball coach, and I don't even know where he's at right now. I know he's at West Virginia, Cincinnati, but he even did an article this week that I think it was Sports Illustrated took it, that talked about how like basketball has gotten away from just playground basketball. Everything is organized and all they do is play games, so they never get to practice. So if you're a parent, coach, whatever, understand this. Just because you're playing games doesn't necessarily mean you're getting ahead. And just because you start early doesn't necessarily mean you're going to stay ahead. And just because you buy into the philosophy of starting late, it doesn't mean that you're always going to be behind. I truly believe this. One, it's about reps. Playing and practicing, you get more reps. Go in the backyard. Listen, you can get more reps with your kids with a bucket of balls or any whatever apparatus it is, and you can hit and throw and whatever. They're going to get more reps than if they play in a game, and it's going to cost you less money, and it's going to be great family time. So I really believe youth sports need to be for those kids that don't have parents. And us of those who are parents need to be reaching out and trying to make a difference in those kids' lives, because our kids kind of have the advantage. So I'm very fortunate that I grew up in a home that was that way, that the focus was never on sport. It was just about getting better in life. The other thing when it comes to this whole idea, if you don't start early, you'll always be behind. I truly believe this. There is no research to back this up. Nothing. This is my own learning over the course of my 39 years of life. Here's what I believe. I believe when we start a kid early, they do get ahead. It's the nature of the beast. But what a kid learns from 5 to 10 years old that takes 5 years and all this energy and all this time and this emotional drain, and you're dragging the other 3 or 4 kids in the back of the car with you, and you're living on nachos and hot dogs at concession stands, which is a big deal. I think we should offer some healthier choices at youth sports if we really are promoting health, which is what youth sport was really about. But what we do is, here's what happens. In that 5-year gap from 5 years old to 10 years old, you have all these things that are learned. And there's a lot learned in that. And hopefully some of those things are intrinsic and not just extrinsic skill related. But what we see is when a kid turns 10, in 2 years, they can learn all that was learned in 5 years in that 2-year time. And then at 13, everyone's at the same spot. So really, you have 2 years where you may struggle a little because some of these kids are just, they've had more opportunity. But at age 13, when no one still cares, okay, other than the crazy parents that should not be allowed to come to youth sporting events, when no one still cares, everyone kind of ends up at the same spot. And here's what I love, is that the kids that have carried that burden the least usually end up loving it the most when it matters more. So, my philosophy is this. I did not need a coach in my children's life at 8 years old, because when it storms, they still end up in my room, in my bed, because mom and dad are the heroes. I need a coach in my children's life when they're 14, 15, 16, and we hand them the keys to a car, and there's a boy calling them that we don't like, and coach has our back. And he says, hey, you need to listen to your parents. They have your best interest in mind. So, a lot of times what we're seeing is we're seeing kids that, man, we're not giving them the right foundation. In the ages that we should be pouring into them emotionally and spiritually and from a character standpoint, we're out playing all these games. And then when life hits and there's some crisis and some some real issues that take place, they panic and maybe they even run from sport because they're just over it. Again, I believe we've taken an adult model of sport in America and we've dumped it on the backs of kids. And are there kids that can carry it? Absolutely. But those kids are probably good enough that if they started late, they would survive too. I had another professor in college. His name was Dr. Leroy Fanning, and he said this: hey, if you want to be an elite level athlete, you got to do two things. You got to work really hard. To be an elite level athlete, you have to work hard. No one's going to argue with that. Here's the other thing you have to do. You have to pick your parents right. And many of us didn't get to choose that. Most of us, all of us, didn't get to choose who our parents were. So listen, when you think of this whole idea of sport and you kind of zoom out and you look at, hey, it's not really about when they start. It's really about what we want them to learn on this journey. Then there's a healthy perspective. And I think we can really gain some things and really begin to have influence on the world in a positive way through this idol of sport in America today. So here's the other thing. I actually saw this, and my friends at 3-Dimensional Coaching talk about this a lot too. But it was a 9-year-old baseball tryout, and it cost money to try out for 9-year-old baseball. The sign said like $125 to try out. Are you kidding me? All right, are you kidding me? Hey, I'll do it for $100 and make a living. No. 9-year-old baseball tryout, and here's what it said: promise to get you to the next level. Newsflash, you know what the next level is? 10-year-old baseball. You don't have to be a genius to get a kid from 9-year-old baseball to 10-year-old baseball. Again, that's a coach, that's an organization that's very, very short-sighted. If we want to have maximum amount of impact in the sports world, we have got to broaden our horizons and say, what is it that sport really teaches? I mean, we throw these words around like character, resilience, empathy, perseverance. It's baloney. All right? I'm calling the bluff. I'm calling the bluff on myself. I'm calling the bluff on other coaches. We kind of called it on Coach Walls last week. Like, are we really about training these kids for life, or are we really about just making our little boy or our little girl a superstar? Listen, so much of that is out of our control. We need to be focused on what we can do to really make these young men and young women great adults, great spiritual leaders, great moms and dads in the future. So, for those of you out there that are parents, for those of you that are out there at coaches, listen, let's zoom out. Let's zoom out and let's actually. My wife, she just joined. She's probably super annoyed. She has to hear this stuff all the time. But let's zoom out and really stop asking the question of when should a kid start. I'm a wrestling coach. I have a little boy who's 5, and people ask me all the time, what is it? When will your kid start? And really, it doesn't matter when my kid starts. It matters, where do we want him to finish? What do I want him to learn on this journey? And I just hope he has great people in his life that can teach him to be a great person. Last week, we talked about, hey, so many of the kids today have, that they have gifts that get them to a room that their character won't allow them to stay. So we've got to be doing something to develop that character. So as you are pulled and are struggling with this whole idea of just going all in at 6, 7, 8-year-old sport, man, pause, hit the pause button, take a time out, and really begin to ask, what do we want to gain in our kids' life and our family life from this whole idea of sport? My daughter played in a game last night. I didn't get to be there, but I asked her about one of her friends last night, and it was such a proud moment. I said, hey, well, what about this person? And she said, man, she got to play so much. 6 exclamation marks. And then she said, she did so good. 6 exclamation marks. Listen, life will, our own individual self will teach us enough about being selfish. As adults, we need to be teaching, and as coaches, we need to be teaching what it means to be unselfish. And we need to teach our young people how to be excited for other people as well. So as you continue to go on this journey, remember, ask yourself, hey, we may be a little bit behind when it matters the least, but will we actually be ahead when it matters the most? I do not believe that you have to start super early to make it in this world we call sports. I think you just have to be focused on the right things. If you want to read more about this, you can go to heathesslinger.com. I have a article written, a blog written on this. I call it a sport misconception. If you don't start early, you'll always be behind. Again, that's at heathesslinger.com. Thanks for sharing these videos. Last week we had over 11,000 people that watched us talking about participation trophies. So listen, I want to be a part of changing the sports world. I want families to get back to focusing on what matters most, and let's use sport as a platform to accomplish those things. In my own words, I call that a better way. I hope that you guys will tune in next week. We'll be back next week talking about more issues in this sports world that you and I want to be a part of making better. Thanks so much.